Para X.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Merry meet and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. For tread the circle thrice about, to keep unwelcome spirits out. Abide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Merry meet everybody and welcome. Now tonight, Barry and Connie Strohm, hosts of Channeling History here on the Para X Radio Network every Sunday night, are with us, and they're not exactly channeling history of the past today, but instead he'll be channeling a major event that is making history right now, the war between Russia and the Ukraine, with souls on the other side who are quite familiar and participated in wars that took place when they were alive. So we're talking about and talking to, hopefully, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, General George Patton, President John F. Kennedy, and President Theodore Roosevelt. We'll be looking to get some otherworldly insights about what's happening in Russia, and we'll be asking each of them, if they were in charge, what would their strategy be, and what might they want to do to end the war. As always, those of you in the chat room who have questions for our channeled guests, please send me a message in private, and we'll get it up there. And other listeners who are listening to the show that's live, going right now, and you want to join us, we're at paraxradionetwork.com. Now, since we've got a full house coming through and just an hour to talk to them all, we'd better get cracking. So, Barry and Connie, thank you for being here tonight.
Well, thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to be with you again, Marla.
Oh, thank you. Well, we've got the lineup of who we wish to hear from, but don't know in what order they'll be coming through. But it's going to be a very interesting hour to hear thoughts and strategies, because all of these people that we're hoping to channel come from different times in American history. So let me give a very quick history lesson about those who are coming through, so people who might not know will figure out why we chose those particular 4, even though there were, half a dozen others that we could have also gotten, but that's a whole nother show. So let's start with Theodore Roosevelt, because with the beginning of the Spanish-American War in late April of 1898, he resigned his post as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and with Army Colonel Leonard Wood, he formed the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry Regiment, also known as the Rough Riders. And in some ways, the Rough Riders were very similar to those fighting in the Ukraine right now, because of the diversity of characters that were accompanying the regiment. I mean, there were Ivy Leaguers, there were professionals, there were amateur athletes, there were upscale gentlemen, cowboys, frontiersmen, Native Americans, trades people, sheriffs, former soldiers. I mean, it was, just like in the Ukraine, everybody's there to fight. And additionally, Roosevelt's success, his successful efforts to broker the end of the Russo-Japanese War won him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906. All right, President Kennedy had his dealings with the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a direct and dangerous confrontation between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Cold War in 1962, when the two superpowers came closest to a nuclear conflict. Now, Putin is threatening nuclear war, so hopefully history isn't going to repeat itself. General George Patton commanded the 7th United States Army in the Mediterranean theater of World War II, and the 3rd United States Army in France and Germany after the Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1954. And Winston Churchill was a British statesman who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 to 1945. During the Second World War, he was best known for his wartime leadership. So they've all got good things going. And Barry, I think let's find out about who's coming through first.
I think President Roosevelt is going to talk to us first.
Okay. Well, welcome, President Roosevelt.
Thank you, Marla. It's an honor to be here.
And if I had to say Rough Riders 3 times in a row, I don't think I'd make it through. Good tongue twister. What are your thoughts on the war of the Ukraine that's going on now?
Well, first of all, everything has changed so much since my day. The weaponry is so incredible. I mean, bear in mind, we were just discovering how to fly, and now you've got some of these incredible aircraft that are capable of such destruction. You also have a leader in Russia that's right now he's got himself in over his head. We had leaders in our time. We were facing different things, of course. In my day, we were trying to do the Monroe Doctrine, keep the country safe, but we never had any great times that the United States was in danger as it is today.
In your opinion, should we get any further involved than we already are?
Well, I always said speak softly and carry a big stick. What I'm seeing from our government right now is they're speaking loudly and carrying a small stick. The Russians only understand power. As we watch this from over here, we're seeing that they have absolutely no regard for individual lives. We're watching them as they're attacking the hospitals and civilians. And in our time, we were very careful not to harm civilians. They're really showing a degree of barbarianism that exceeds what we had anticipated for modern warfare. War is never pretty, but they are just making an obscene scene of it.
Yeah, it's sad, fighting is one thing, but bringing in civilians, children, burning down and blowing up things, it's beyond comprehension.
Indeed it is. It's something that we really didn't expect out of them. We thought that they would have some civility, but apparently there are no limits to what they'll do, and that makes it much more dangerous.
Yeah, and it's kind of scary. But all right, now let's suppose that you were sitting in the White House right now. What would your strategies be?
Right now, my strategy would be to attempt to help the Ukrainian people as much as we could. I know that the Russians like to bluster and carry on, but I think that they have to understand that there's a limit to what the free world will take from them. I know that their president and leader is very hard to read. I mean, we see things from over here that you can't see, that your leaders can't see. But he is also going to he's going to run into a lot of problems, and he knows it. How he reacts to these problems, we will just have to wait and see. But my first thing would be to get as much modern armament into the hands of the Ukrainians as possible, so that they can kill as many Russians as possible. Once they start bringing a lot of the bodies back, the sons and daughters are disappearing and the families are worried about them, they will create pressures. He is not above the pressure of the people. None of these dictators rule by themselves. They have to have support. And I think that you'll see that his support will start to disappear if more body bags start appearing.
Well, the other problem that bothers me so much is that he's getting desperate. And when you act in desperation, sometimes it sounds like you lost your marbles.
He is very emotionally disturbed right now. He did not anticipate a lot of what is happening. I know he felt that the people would simply fold, that Ukraine, he felt that the war would be over by now, and he's now realizing it's far from being over. We know that he greatly fears the armaments that the other countries are sending to the people to fight with. I mean, there will probably be a time that he has so many forces that he'll just simply overwhelm them. But the question will be, how much damage can they do to them before they are overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's the sad part. And, the other thing, too, is that from lots of news stories and things firsthand from different people, the Russian people are not behind him either. So he's going to get, they're going to maybe turn on him in some way. I don't know if they can, but, it's not like, hey, let's all follow the leader. They don't want to follow the leader. They're having a very bad time now themselves.
The people are going to have a terrible time. Their economy is going to be ruined through this, and they're the ones who will really suffer. I mean, the leaders in Russia have stolen so much money from the people that they can be very comfortable no matter what happens. There are people in Russia that are the billionaires, and they're being hurt very badly right now. I think that you will probably see in the future that they will be unwilling to support Putin, and then it will become very interesting.
Yeah, it'll be kind of interesting if they don't lynch him too. I mean, it's bad. It's just bad. And, people in this country, people in Poland, for example, and Hungary are afraid, that their troops are going to come marching over there. We're worried about perhaps World War III, which would be a nuclear war. In your opinion, how aggressive is it going to get, and should we really be on standby and kind of nervous?
The world has to take this very seriously. You saw what happened with Hitler. In the beginning, he was stable, knew exactly what he was doing. But as he started to lose the war, he started to take drugs and he became less stable. And as a result, he threw many, many people into battle that should have never been there. He basically destroyed the country, where a wise move for him would have been to negotiate a peace and end the war before his country was destroyed.
Mm-hmm. So we should keep our defenses up as civilians, not the rest of the world is doing what they're doing, but I think everybody's kind of sitting on tender blocks right now just because we just don't know that there is a button that he could push, and that would be pretty bad.
Well, there is a button he can push, but bear in mind other people have got to do the launches. The generals in Russia totally understand that if they were to launch a nuclear attack, that they would be wiped out as well. So hopefully there are a few checks over there that could stop him if indeed he did intend to go ahead with a nuclear attack.
Yeah, well, I guess time will tell for sure. But I really thank you for your input and your advice, and we'll just wait and see what happens. But thank you for popping in.
Well, thank you so much. It's nice to know that some of us are still appreciated and remembered, and I thank you for allowing me to give you my opinion.
Our pleasure. All right. Barry, who's up next?
President Kennedy.
All right. Welcome to the show, President Kennedy.
Thank you, Marla. Very nice that you asked me. I certainly appreciate it.
Well, you have something in common with what we're putting up with now, as far as the Russians are concerned. And so, I think everybody that I talk to tonight, I'm going to ask the same questions. And let me start out with your thoughts on this war in the Ukraine.
When the Russians were attempting to set up missiles in Cuba, it was not just the missiles. They also had several of their submarines capable of launching nuclear weapons into water off our coast. We knew that it was an incredibly dangerous situation, but we also knew that we couldn't allow them to get their missiles into Cuba. We managed to negotiate, and we did make concessions in where we would put our nuclear weapons in Europe at the time. I realized that we had to give Russian leadership a way out. Now the question is, in your modern times, how do you give Putin and his leadership a way out of this? Since the battle and the war has already started, he is facing a much different circumstance than I faced with the Russians. The Cold War was at its height, obviously, but we were not fighting them anywhere physically. There was much going on behind the scenes, and we were perfectly capable of a nuclear strike should they have fired first. But the war had not started. In this case, Putin miscalculated, and he started the war. He would have been much better off to negotiate neutrality if that is indeed what he wanted in Ukraine. Now he's at a point that for him to end the war, it's going to be taken as a sign of weakness. Russians are famous for trying to deal from strength. They've always been bullies, and sometimes their bluster has gained them great advances in what they were trying to accomplish. For instance, Putin took over Crimea, and it was relatively simple for him. I think he felt that the rest of the Ukraine would fold as Crimea did, but it's a much different circumstance. The people of Crimea basically spoke Russian, and it was very simple for him, or relatively simple for him, to take over the area. I think the fact that the Ukrainians gave up as easily in that situation, as well as the rest of the world, really did not do much to Putin. I think he felt that it would be the same circumstance. He miscalculated by the fact that the people in much of the area in which they are fighting have friends and family in Russia, but they do not have the strong ties that the people of Crimea did. It's going to be very difficult situation now. Putin is going to be damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he negotiates a peace, they'll look at him as being soft. If he loses the war, he will have a real problem. And if he wins the war, he's going to have to face guerrilla armies and fighting for the next 20 years, and it's going to bleed Russia dry. I don't think he took into full consideration the size of the country he was trying to conquer. It's a very large country, and there are many, many people that are very patriotic towards the Ukraine. As we watch from over here, we're really not sure what choices he really has at this point. An obvious answer would be if his generals took over and negotiated a peace and tried to save as much as they could. I mean, perhaps they could negotiate a small area of Ukraine that the Russians could take over, make it look like a victory. It's a very difficult situation, and it's much more difficult. Now, we faced a very difficult situation, but there was a way out through negotiation.
Well, I want to ask also about NATO, the fact that, all the countries are going along with NATO, as in, yes, we're not going to give them a shut down the fly zone yet, which that is a flip a coin kind of thing, because really we should, but then, NATO says we don't want to get involved any further when in this war. So what do you think about that, the fly zone and us not getting too involved?
In my opinion, NATO has to stay out of it until they are brought into it. There are many, many factors concerning NATO. I know Putin doubted whether they would get involved. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. If NATO declares a no-fly zone, Russia will challenge the NATO planes, and there will be and essentially NATO will be drawn into the war.
Mm-hmm.
They're currently making the proper decision about the no-fly zone. If it expands and Putin attacks one of the NATO countries, then NATO will respond very forcibly, and that is when they would enforce no-fly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Putin is stupid enough to attack NATO at this time. He'll bluster, he'll threaten nuclear weapons. But he knows if he fires a nuclear weapon towards a NATO country, he will essentially be destroyed. And the Russian country will be back in the Middle Ages.
Well, his being destroyed, I mean, a lot of people are of the opinion that he knows that he's losing the battle, and whatever he does, as horrible as it may be, he's got nothing to lose because he probably won't live, long enough to go on trial. What do you think?
He is extremely paranoid right now. He is isolating himself, and he's in a bunker much similar to the way Hitler behaved at the end of the war. He is fearing assassination, and he is even avoiding close contact with these most friendly generals. He has created a terrible quandary for himself. I wish that there was a way to negotiate out the way that we did in '62. But right now I'm not seeing it. He has isolated himself and made decisions that it will be very, very difficult to negotiate out of.
Yeah, I mean, it's all right, so suppose, what would your strategy be? If you could right now sit down in the White House and make the decision without anybody else's input, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I'm very glad I'm not in the White House right now because I would not be wanting to make the decisions.
Right.
The one thing that the Soviet Union understands is strength. If NATO and the United States do not show a totally united front to him, he is going to continue to try to push and try to gain. The NATO countries and the United States and Great Britain have got to stand firm, and they have got to try to undermine him. The best way out of this, frankly, is if the generals would take over and remove him from power. And I think you all know what that would mean. That if they remove him, they have an off-ramp. And they now have the ability to negotiate. With him in power, we find it very difficult to see how they can negotiate out of it.
I mean, speculation, or maybe do you know the outcome of what this is going to be? Is it going to go on for years? Is World War III a strong possibility? What's your opinion or knowledge?
It is a very dangerous time for the world. There are certain things we can say, and there are certain things we can't say from over here. But the countries, the free countries of the world, have got to take this incredibly seriously. They have got to figure out how they can maintain a negotiated settlement. And that is going to be very, very difficult with Putin in power.
If he were, I don't know this, maybe you do, but if he were outed, whether it be dead or alive, who would be the next in line, or would somebody else next in line be just as bad as he?
There are some people that are very close to him, and they're very bad people, make no mistake, but they're not stupid. They have to understand that what is now taking place is going to destroy the economy, and that people will turn on them. So I am personally of the opinion at this time that anybody is going to be better than Putin right now.
Yeah, and they're probably not, even though they might not agree with all the things that he's doing, they know better than to speak up. They have to be yes men at his beck and call, right?
Yes, he is being ruthless with people that disagree with him at this point. So they totally understand that in reality there can only be a single outcome if he's removed.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Mr. President, for being here and giving us your opinion. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. We have channeled with Barry and Connie before, and we all are very thankful when they give us the opportunity to speak. So thank you.
You're very welcome. All right, Barry. It's about time for you to clear your head for a minute, and we're going to take a break. And, we'll get back to some pretty interesting stuff going on.
Okay. Be right back.
All right. Everybody stay put, and we will be right back, too.
Stirring the Cauldron will be right back, so don't go away. If you end up with webbed feet, remember, you've been warned.
missed an episode of Stirring the Cauldron, then be sure to check out marlabrooks.com and check out the archive. And while you're there, check out Marla's weekly Witches Oracle card reading. Explore the site to find many great resources, such as information on tarot, oracle readings, metaphysical consultations, and links to all of Marla's books. That's marlabrooks.com.
Throughout time, events have occurred that have shaped human history. Spirit voices from the past have many stories to tell, and for the past several years, channelers Barry and Connie Strohm have been conducting live channeling sessions and relaying those stories and messages from those on the other side. We invite you to tune in to Barry and Connie's new show, Channeling History, on the Para X Radio Network, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, as they relay the messages of those voices from the past, the ones who have witnessed history firsthand, and those who have made history themselves.
Hey everyone, it's Marla. If you like tonight's episode of Stirring the Cauldron and the archive podcast as well, take a look at the show's YouTube channel and check out the dozens of shows that are there just waiting to be heard. New shows are added each week, and while you're there, why not subscribe? It's free. And if you click on that tiny little bell icon at the top of the page, you'll be notified when new shows are available. Just go to youtube.com and then type in Stirring the Cauldron Para X and the link will appear. Just like magic.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
It's an interesting night tonight with Barry and Connie Strohm. We're talking to some historical figures, channeling some historical figures who are very close to war and know what's going on. And we thought we would just get a couple people to talk to and see what they're thinking about on the other side, whether they know things, whether they have some good things to offer. And so in the first half hour, we spoke to President Kennedy and President Theodore Roosevelt. And Barry, who's up next?
Winston Churchill will speak next for us.
Okay. Welcome, Prime Minister.
Welcome, Marla. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, it would be under better circumstances. It might be more fun, but we have, all of us, you, us, and everybody else in the world are kind of on tenterhooks right now, dealing with a war that probably should not be fought right now, and wonder what your thoughts are on the war of the Ukraine.
Well, in my day, Great Britain and the Ukraine were very similar. Keep in mind that the Nazis attacked us. They did not care if they killed civilians. They actually began with the Blitz on London, trying to kill many people as they could and to make it as uncomfortable as they could.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind that the Nazis never feared war crimes. All they wanted to do was kill. Ukraine is very similar to what we went through. They're being attacked. They're being attacked brutally. The Russians are killing civilians, and they have no regard for human life. So really, what we went through is very similar to what is currently going on in Ukraine.
And what's going on in Great Britain? What are your thoughts about your country and the war? Well,
Great Britain, I'm proud to say, has actually been one of the more forceful countries.
Yes.
They were among the first to sanction, and they are sending equipment and weapons to the Ukrainians. I think, sadly, that it's going to be too late. The Russian army is just so massive that I think that they will be able, in the long run, to probably overrun the country. The key to what is taking place is for the Ukrainians to inflict as much damage and death to the Russians as they can accomplish. There is no plausible way that I see in the future that Russia will be able to maintain control over the Ukraine. There will be much guerrilla warfare from their people. The free countries in NATO, I am sure, will help support an ongoing guerrilla operation against them. Russia should have learned their lesson in Afghanistan. They tried all of their tactics there and finally had to leave. They're in a position that there is no real long-term victory for them. This was an incredible miscalculation on the part of Putin. It will be his end one way or another.
Yeah, I know that there was talk about, with Boris Johnson, sending troops over to the Ukraine. Has that been settled? Is he going to? Are there troops deployed over to the Ukraine already?
There is, in all probability, special forces present helping the Ukrainian people, but they will not become involved in active fighting.
And I know
it would be very foolish to commit armed forces. That would be an act of war against the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind, the Russians are just looking for an excuse.
Yeah. Well, they would think it would be an excuse if we sent anybody over there to help in any way, I would guess. I mean, they're not thinking straight. And, it's kind of hard to argue with a madman, isn't it?
It is. And keep in mind, the Soviets have lost several of their top generals in this war already.
Yes.
So they are taking heavy losses, much heavier than they're ever admitting.
And they're not. Oh, sorry.
The only hope the Ukrainian people have is if they can sustain a high level of losses for a period of time. If they can get lucky with the weather, the weather can restrict some of the army's advances. He was stupid to order this attack at this time of year because there will be much mud and it will certainly harm his forces. If the Ukraine, their only chance is to have a high body count for the Russians, there will be a time that somebody will get involved and calmer heads will prevail. The longer they can hold on, the more that all of the actions against Russia will hurt both the people and the very powerful individuals that up to this time have backed Putin.
Well, I heard a very sad story the other day about a Russian soldier that made me believe that not all those soldiers are fighting with their hearts like the Ukrainians are. And it was a text that a soldier sent to his mother just to say hello. And she said, well, are you done with training? Where are you? Like a mom would. And he said, Mom, there was no training. They lied to us. And now we're fighting. And we don't want to fight. And he said, I'm scared. He said, I'm really scared. And 10 minutes later, he was gone. They got him.
Mm-hmm.
So, it makes you think that, all those people that are out there are fighting because they have to, not because they have a vested interest in what they're doing.
There are different levels of training in the Soviet Army. They have some very advanced trainees. They have special forces. They have soldiers that are highly efficient. However, the majority of the troops that they are committing to this are not volunteers. They've been conscripted into the Army. They are there for a short period of time, they thought. And indeed, many of them were simply told this was a training mission.
Mm-hmm.
The Soviet Union has proven to be very inept at being able to supply their forces. They are running out of supplies, and many of the units are out of food. This is absolutely not going the way that they had thought it would go. And as I said earlier, if the Ukrainians can buy time and create as much havoc on the army as possible, if NATO nations can give them modern offensive weapons that they can inflict the damage with, that is the only way. They have to inflict enough damage that individuals say enough is enough and stop Putin.
What would your strategy be if you were in charge right now?
If I was in charge, I would try to get as much armament as possible into the hands of the Ukrainian army. They are willing fighters, where the Russian soldiers, the majority of them are not. I would attempt to get as many of the soldiers to surrender peacefully. The soldiers are not being fed. I would make it attractive for as many of them to desert as possible. And I would be sending every piece of equipment I could get my hands on to give to the Ukrainian army, especially anti-tank weapons and equipment that can be effective against the Russian Air Force. The Russian Air Force is much stronger and it strongly outnumbers the Ukrainians. Another thing that I would try to get to the Ukrainians are drones. They can be incredibly effective, especially against armies that are bogged down like the Russians are right now.
Yeah, it's a crapshoot right now. It's going to probably escalate before it gets better, but do you think that World War III might be a strong possibility?
It's always a possibility, but the billionaires that have a lot of control over Putin do not want to become dust. They're enjoying their lives. And I feel it's just a matter of time till better heads will prevail in Russia.
Well, time will tell, that's for sure. But I want to thank you very much for coming in and giving us your opinions and your wisdom. And there was somebody in the chat room that paid you a great compliment, and it just went away, and I can't tell you what it is, but it was a great compliment.
Well, thank you, Marla. Remember, in the beginning of the Second World War, they didn't think Great Britain could win either. I'm hoping that the same fighting ideas and patriotism are prevalent in the Ukraines as it was with us Brits. So thank you. Thank you for having me, and goodbye.
Okay. Good night. All right. So is General Patton around?
Absolutely, Martha. I'm very happy to be here to speak.
And I think you have some very good ideas and some, good thoughts that you're going to share with us. And what are your thoughts on the war in the Ukraine?
I think it will be a disaster for Russia. Keep in mind that the Russians have always been bullies. They made political agreements that allowed them to take over portions of Berlin, and they were conceded countries after the Second World War. I knew them well. I knew their soldiers. I knew how they fought. I knew their weaknesses. Keep in mind that the Russians never have any regard for life.
Mm-hmm.
When they came in to Germany, they killed all the civilians they could find. Their idea was to destroy. Currently, I think that world opinion will have some effect on what they do in Ukraine. But Russian brutality is famous. It always has been, and it always will.
You can't fight City Hall, but what should we get further involved? Will we be getting further involved? Is it the right thing to do, or do we step back and watch it play out?
Marla, you must get involved. Now, I'm not saying you send forces in, but you have to do everything you can to undermine the Russian government, to bring hardship upon the Russian people, and to supply as much lethal weaponry as absolutely possible to Ukraine. The Ukrainians are very patriotic people. They will fight to the death, given the proper equipment. They will raise havoc with the Russian forces. The worst thing that can happen for Russia is for them to win the war. They will only think they won the war. It will be a second Afghanistan for them. The Patriots will kill their leadership. They will kill their soldiers. They will be involved for 20 years of fighting, if they're lucky.
Somebody in the chat room just wrote, "There's nobody wins an unwinnable war." So, do you think this war is unwinnable, or just folly, Putin's folly, or something? Maybe that's what it should be called.
Putin was an idiot, but Russian leadership, Russian armies have always been led by idiots. I felt at the end of the war that we should have taken on the Russian army. We had our forces there, we had the ability, and even though the Russians were victorious in Germany, they had been seriously depleted. I knew that Stalin would not be able to keep his agreements. In all my experience with the Russians, all they did was lie. You could never trust them, and you still can't. It should be obvious. You must exert force. It can be overt, or it can be secretive. There are now many things that people can do. There is cyber warfare. There are many things that we never ever conceived of as weapons. The most important thing is to cut the flow of revenue to Russia. You have traders in so-called friendly governments that buy petroleum products from them and are still purchasing. You must economically dry up the money that would be going to Russia. They have a very weak economy, and the people cannot stand much of this. There is much unrest over there that is being kept from the press and from the free world. There will be a time that the people will take over. They always have in Russia. You can ask the czars, they didn't do well.
If there was to be a World War III, who would the allies be to Russia? Because I think China's stepped back a little bit, haven't they?
Yes, but China could not step back totally in the event that they felt Russia was going to be destroyed. That would put NATO or enemies on all of their borders, and they could not stand that. They will be forced to prop up Russia. But China, for the time being, would be very reluctant to get into a direct confrontation with the United States.
So who else might be with Russia then? Or are they going to stand alone, thinking that, with that big ego and that bulliness, that they could do it on their own?
I think if it really looks like Russia is going to be destroyed, and I'm not speaking by war, I'm speaking by economics, I'm speaking by them losing in Ukraine, the only people that can prop up Russia is China. The question will become if China wants to take a risk on being destroyed along with Russia. The leadership of China, even though they are totalitarian, they are fairly intelligent people. They will take risks. They will be bullies, but they also know that their economy depends on exports. And if the entire world stopped buying from China and Russia, their economies would disintegrate. And they are well aware of that. They will push, but I think they understand the limits.
What about North Korea? Would they join? I mean, misery loves company, and they're both crackpots.
North Korea, even though they have a huge army, they're mostly conscripts, they're poorly trained, and they have very poor equipment. Keep in mind that in the Korean War, we were kicking their ass until China got involved and saved them. The leadership of North Korea is obviously a bit demented, but they also like their lifestyles. I don't think that they're going to put themselves in a position where they would be annihilated along with the rest of the countries.
Okay. And who might jump to our aid very quickly? The obvious?
The obvious, the usual. NATO, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're the biggest contributors to NATO. I mean, Germany has failed to fund their promises with NATO. Now, all of a sudden, they're on the front lines, and they're worried, so they're going to put more money in. Great Britain, Australia, United States, and now Japan. That would be an unbreakable union. They would definitely stand together.
Yeah. And we would be allies with people that were our enemies in World War II. Interesting how things change in time, right?
Yes, that's true. But you also don't realize that we still have many, many enemies in Germany.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we do all over the place. But do you think World War III is a strong possibility?
It is a distinct possibility. But I still believe that calmer heads will prevail. They know when they start pushing that button, that is also the end of their lives as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, I really thank you for your opinions and your interest in popping in and letting us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marla. As you know, I always enjoy speaking with Barry and Connie. I have been able to get my message out through them, and I thoroughly appreciate it. So thank you for having me.
Anytime. All right, Barry. Clear the cobwebs.
Yes.
And this might be a good time to tell everybody who you have on your show this Sunday, since we're kind of on the same subject, sort of.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to pursue this, but from a little different angle. We're going to have Colin Powell on. Colin just passed last year. He was Secretary of State, head of the Army, just a great patriot. And we're going to be asking him some deep background questions about how we got here, about what we should have been doing, and what we should be doing in the future. So it's going to be very interesting. We'll have around 50 good, hard questions for him. So I think between what we're doing here tonight with you and what we're doing Sunday night on our show, people should be able to get a pretty good idea of what's taking place over there.
Yeah, well, we're just going to have to sit back and see what's going on, but it's very hurtful what we're seeing, and it's hard to believe that people don't care about other human beings. They just care about themselves. So, we'll have to just, like I said, sit back and wait.
Yeah, sometimes you think that you can't have much effect, but the more that people understand the truth of things, the better the chances are that maybe just some little whisper will be heard.
And we got some good information from the two presidents and the Prime Minister and General Patton. I mean, different viewpoints, but, pretty much the same mindset.
Yeah, right? What intrigued me was President Kennedy telling us that he had a way out of negotiation, which doesn't exist right now for Putin.
Yeah.
I think that was probably one of the most important statements we heard.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let you go and rest your weary brain. I don't know about your bones, but your brain. And Connie, thank you for riding side saddle tonight.
My pleasure. I enjoyed. It's a great panel that you had this evening.
We did a good job.
And a very good subject.
Yes.
There's nobody else out there going to duplicate that panel.
No, well, not exactly. You're right. It's good. So anyway, again, thank you so much for being here and following my crazy idea of what to do this week.
That was not crazy, Marla.
No, it was a great idea. I'm glad we could participate.
I am too. So thank you guys, and let's thank everybody for listening in tonight. And as always, blessed be, and merry meet again.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2009.
You have been listening to the Para X Radio Network.